The leader of the ghoulish gang took a step towards the doctor, Romana and Nathan, arms outstretched, and repeated his pain-dulled order.
Kill them.
His 5 companions, plus bizarre pig-goat fusion, each complied with a step forward of their own. Behind the 2 Time Lords and the crumpled detective, Northwestward Cemetery Gate barred their retreat. Lou, Timmy and Penny staring in horror from the other side, helpless to intervene. The doctor looked left and right desperately before grabbing his companion's wrists.
"Run!"
he yelled. With that he dragged them with him as he dodged to the left of the advancing, menacing Albions and passed, with all the speed they could muster, deeper into the cemetery.
"Doctor!"
Romana piped up as they ran.
"You're taking us back into the graveyard. This seems a little unwise."
The doctor had by now dropped both their wrists to enable all to pump their arms freely. It also allowed the doctor to raise a finger.
"It seemed to me unwise to try and scale a 12-foot fence or somehow break the chains on the gate before being torn apart by whatever they are."
At this point they all glanced back to check upon their pursuers. Whatever they were not slow. The doctor ducked right into a smaller side path, yelling,
"Don't worry, I know where we're going."
"I just wish I did,"
Romana cried with a roll of her eyes. Before the doctor could muster a witty retort, there came a sudden strangled yelp from Nathan. The most voluble of their sepulchral enemies must have taken a shortcut, for he had burst from the bushes beside their path and had his hands tight around the private detective's throat. Nathan choked and his eyes bulged, but his face was otherwise unaltered. Turning purple was clearly not an Albion thing. Romana whipped her sword cane free in an instant and, taking careful aim to miss poor Nathan, plunged the blade into the chest of his assailant. The weapon was buried up to its handle in their attacker's breast, but had none of the expected effects. There was little blood escaping from the wound, and what there was looked oddly thick, dark, and purplish. The impaled Albion glanced slowly down at his newly acquired protrusion and gave a low moaning growl, which sounded more weary or annoyed than pained. His grip upon Nathan's neck had not eased in the slightest. The doctor ran up and pushed the skewered Albion hard in the chest with the palms of his hands either side of Romana's weapon. The injured individual pitched over backwards, losing his grip upon Nathan and sliding free of the swordstick in the process. The doctor grabbed Nathan and Romana and forcefully encouraged them to resume their run, Nathan coughing and rasping, while Romana quickly sheathed her weapon without cleaning it.
"People or things really seem to take a shine to your neck,"
the doctor observed to Nathan. The detective merely nodded and coughed some more.
"And in spite of the unearthly origin and strength of Rongad's blade, the Argon's weapon proved remarkably ineffectual."
Romana looked a little pained at the mention of the former owner of the sword, but was forced to agree.
"It does seem stabbing these weird hunters is utterly useless."
The doctor waggled his head, looking at her grimy weapon.
"Perhaps not. We shall see,"
he said cagily. They could still hear the hunt crashing through the undergrowth and grinding over gravel close behind. Suddenly the doctor stopped.
"Doctor, what are you doing?"
Romana asked.
"Quickly, in here!"
the doctor barked. With this he dashed into a grand, roughly cubic building, like a small Greek temple with solid walls. Nathan and Romana quickly recognized it as the tomb through which they had entered Northwestward Cemetery. They dashed in after the doctor. The companions traversed the tunnel to the cellar of Dunbar House in no time at all. All 3 hared through that room and scrambled up the stairs to the corridor above, the doctor leading the way, Romana just behind, and Nathan bringing up the rear. As they stood there, panting, a look of utter horror seized the doctor's features. He dived back down the cellar steps, Romana and Nathan now looking equally horrified at his inexplicable behaviour. They heard a muffled thump and a sound of grinding metal. Finally the doctor reappeared with a weary and more sedate pace.
The door was left open,
the doctor said in exasperation, his face still shocked. Nathan remembered he had been the last one through.
I'm sorry, buddy,
he rasped painfully, now with a sore throat to match his already injured tongue. The doctor threw up his hands.
But think what might have happened,
he cried.
If we'd left a perfectly good and serviceable barrier unlocked while being pursued by a murderous horde.
Romana frowned at the doctor.
Yes, I think we all understand,
she said cautiously.
I mean,
the doctor continued undaunted,
even if we had escaped unharmed, imagine what might have happened to the surrounding community if we'd let those things roam free into northwestward. Can you imagine what the papers would say?
Nathan nodded, sheepish, but also confused by the ongoing tirade. Romana decided to step in.
Doctor, you really seem to be labouring this point. More than even I would have thought necessary,
she advised. The doctor frowned, shaking his head. However, his mood seemed to subside.
I'm sorry. I think it just touched a nerve. Ancient memories. I suspect this kind of thing has happened all too often in the past. You're right, of course, Romana. Best we leave it there.
With that, they all traipsed back to the entrance hall to gather their thoughts. Unfortunately, barely a notion was collected before distraction reigned. Nathan walked over to one of the display cases and opened it. He picked up an ornately cast bronze bell. If it had been of earth, one might have said it was vaguely oriental in appearance.
Gee,
Nathan exclaimed as he shifted his grip on the long shaft of its handle.
It says here it comes all the way from planet Nepalia.
At this he shook it once. The clapper was clearly still present as a single booming clang ran out. As the notes slowly died, Romana raised an eyebrow.
Lucky we're not trying to be stealthy. Also lucky it didn't fall apart.
They would soon have cause to question their luck. Outside it was dark, the eclipse ongoing. However, from what little could be seen around the edges of the drapes, it seemed the lighting was increasing.
Looks like day is returning,
Romana noted. The doctor's creased face betrayed his doubt.
I'm not sure. Nathan, what exactly did the name plaque call your bell?
Oh, the Phoenix Bell. That's odd. I'm sure the Phoenix is a myth of Kroidon origin, not Nepalian.
Nathan mused. The doctor's face hardened.
I fear you may have focused on the least relevant part of the myth.
At that moment, the front door exploded inwards, wrenched mostly off its hinges. As it crashed into the window next to it, the three companions were temporarily blinded by the white-hot light which filled the opening. Their eyes adjusted to the glare just in time to make out the figure entering. It was more a roaring flame in shape than a well-defined form. It stood 7 feet tall and had to duck to enter. Now just inside, it was at least as wide as the entrance, its wings hanging down by its sides, neither fully unfurled nor at rest. It had legs and tail equally fiery in aspect, and there was some suggestion of a beak in the raging inferno of its face. Two features which stood out were its eyes. They glowed like red embers, but against the yellow-white of the rest of the phoenix hung more like unlit lumps of blackest coal.
What the hell is that?
Romana cried. The doctor was momentarily taken aback, more used to saying such a thing than hearing it. Then he shook his head.
Hell indeed,
he agreed.
By foot and wing, whatever it is, it's a new problem.
As he said this, he nodded towards the curtains and drapes, which hung around the front door and windows. They were just beginning to catch and smoulder. Romana and the doctor stared in disbelief, each desperately trying to ascertain their next move, when something else highly improbable occurred. Nathan took a pace towards the giant burning bird.
Excuse me,
he began.
Would you mind stepping outside?
The two Time Lords both stood staring at the detective. He shrugged.
It seemed worth a try.
There followed something even more improbable. The creature appeared to slowly bow its head, then back out of the door. Quickly, the doctor, Romana and Nathan dashed forwards and pulled all the flaming lengths of cloth free from their rails and smothered the flames. They then used these doused bundles to beat out the patches of woodwork which had begun to smoulder. This most immediate danger to life and property dealt with, they cautiously filed outside to face the phoenix. The flaming entity was painfully bright against the night sky, but all this changed as light suddenly enveloped everything. It was not the phoenix, the eclipse had ended. In fairness, the inexplicable entity was still by far the brightest thing around, but at least it was now slightly less painful on the eyes. A little more calmly now, Romana repeated her earlier question.
So, what is that thing? Is it, as I suspect, some creature of the bulk?
The doctor waggled his hand in front of him.
I can see what you're saying. It certainly does not seem entirely of this realm. Yet I somehow doubt it is something wholly of the bulk either. What I suspect is that it gains entry to our reality via the bulk, due to the porous nature of this region of time and space. But it may not itself be an extension of some 11-dimensional entity. Perhaps it comes from a similar 4-dimensional bubble with slightly different physical rules. Perhaps a differently dimensioned universe altogether. 5D, 6D, 7, 8, 9? Maybe fewer. Does it seem a little flat to you? I suppose it could come from a 3D universe.
3D?
Romana interjected incredulously.
How would that even work?
The doctor held up a warning finger.
Don't be so quick to dismiss the idea. Even in this regeneration, or the one which looked the same at any rate, I have encountered such entities,
he said gravely.
Of course you have.
Romana commented, rolling her eyes.
The point is, the doctor continued, this may well not be an entity of the bulk in the strictest sense. And even more relevant, it may not even be antagonistic towards us. It seems to have taken quite a shine to our friend Nathan here.
It was true, the phoenix seemed to be staring intently at either Nathan, the bell, or both. Romana stroked her chin thoughtfully.
Maybe, maybe not.
She said carefully.
It could have a soft spot for Mr. Ivan. Or it could be that Bell is a device which dragged the poor thing into our universe, and it is essentially Nathan's thrall.
The doctor became lost in thought. Nathan coughed.
Excuse me, fella.
He said to the burning bird.
Are you free to go home whenever you like?
The two Time Lords raised their eyebrows and stared significantly at one another. Much to their surprise, the phoenix slowly nodded. Nathan responded with his own curt inclination of his head.
Oh, great. Well, in that case, fly along home. There's a good boy.
The entity spread its wings and launched itself into the midday sky. With powerful flaming beats, it climbed ever higher until it was lost from view. Nathan held up a finger.
Just a sec,
he said, then dashed back inside the house. He emerged a second later with an old newspaper and began to separate the pages. He used these to pack the inside of the bell.
Are you sure it's wise filling that thing with the most flammable stuff you could find?
Romana asked skeptically.
Better than having it go off by accident.
Nathan responded shortly.
Or deliberately, the doctor countered. Perhaps it would be wiser still to leave it behind.
Nathan did not seem pleased by the idea.
Doesn't sound wise at all to me. It might very well come in handy.
The doctor shuddered a little.
I have some unpleasant memories about handy things,
he began grimly.
But who knows, you could be right.
Nathan took the doctor's final words as a green light. He stored the Phoenix Bell deep inside his trench coat. The trio walked down the sun-dappled drive of Dunbar House in search of the main road and their other companions. Showing remarkable multitasking skills, Romana began to read the scraps of paper she had recovered from the cellar.
The first receipt seems to be for imports. A Morton Air Services. Dated the 15th of January?
This last word was pronounced a little dubiously before being brushed aside.
2 large oblong crates and 6 tea chests. Point of origin, Visegrad Castle via Buda. Destination, Kroidon Aerodrome. Signed by Dr. Nugati.
Fascinating,
the doctor responded. Romana frowned.
I think we know where and how the sarcophagi arrived.
No doubt,
the doctor replied, still lacking the enthusiasm Romana felt appropriate.
The second is from Lawrence Removals. Another bill of lading, this time dated the 5th of October. That was yesterday.
Now the doctor paid attention and stopped dead in his tracks. Romana and Nathan followed suit.
Romana, what else does it say?
The doctor asked in hushed tones.
Less stuff this time. 4 tea chests and 2 trunks. Collected from Dunbar House, destination Kroidon Aerodrome. Imperial Airship A36.
Aerodrome and airship was said with a questioning air.
Yeah, we call our spaceships airships. The whole aerodrome thing goes along with it.
Nathan supplied helpfully.
Yes, yes,
the doctor responded impatiently.
A hangover from their ancient maritime past. Thousands of years of space or air travel is hard to shake. I wonder where Nugatti is going. I have my suspicions.
You think Cairo?
Romana asked.
The doctor nodded. We must make immediate plans to get there ourselves, ideally on this same A36. Where is the nearest available telecom unit?
He asked.
There should be a public one at the station,
Nathan replied. The three companions continued down the driveway. Almost at the road, they ran into Lou, Timmy, and Penny hurrying towards them. They quickly apprised them of their plan, and then all headed back to Northwestwood Station. Upon their arrival, they discovered the telecom was out of order.
No matter,
the doctor said briskly, yet with a worried frown.
We'll call Sir Arthur from Gloriana Station. Not just about the flights. Something needs to be done about the cemetery.
It was a short wait for the next Londra-bound train, and in 10 minutes they were all seated in another 6-person compartment. The doctor and Romana sat together this time, Nathan on her other side, while Lou, Timmy and Penny sat opposite. The doctor stared for a long while at Romana's swordstick.
Romana, could I borrow Rongad's old weapon for a moment?
A shadow passed across her face, but she complied. The doctor took it and held the handle up close to his face, examining the line where it joined the stick itself, a stick which formed the scabbard to the blade beneath. Instead of its usual clean and well-maintained appearance, it was now gummed round with drying and coagulating blood, or whatever that thick purplish liquid actually was. The doctor used his other hand to withdraw the sonic screwdriver and quickly scanned it. He studied the results.
Curiouser and curiouser,
he muttered to himself.
What is it, Doctor?
Romana inquired.
Things I suspected and things I did not.
The doctor began mysteriously.
It is Albion blood, mostly. It also seems to be dead, mostly.
Dead?
Romana exploded.
Those people seem quite active when they attacked us.
The doctor nodded in agreement.
Quite so. It seems all normal cellular functions, i.e. the release of energy via mitochondria, are certainly dormant, almost as if the blood had been drawn from a corpse. However, some additional ingredients seem to be picking up the slack in this regard, taking over the energetic functions of the cells and revitalizing them. A new lease of life, if you will.
Romana frowned as she made sense of the doctor's revelations.
So you're saying someone is reanimating the dead?
The doctor waggled his head in grudging acceptance of her assessment. The faces of their Albion companions were all aghast, and each rendered speechless. Not so Romana.
But how?
The doctor raised a finger.
Ah, well, that brings us to tales of the unexpected.
He began cryptically.
I have detected compounds containing traces of nth material or materials. Given the state of this solar system, no surprise there. Much like events on Mondas, I would not be surprised if someone or something were gathering aid from creatures of the bulk, either knowingly or unknowingly. All undoubtedly disturbing, yet, unfortunately, expected. What I did not expect to find were elements of alien blood and body chemistry.
You just said you found bulk material. It doesn't get much more alien than that.
Romana countered. The doctor shook his head.
That's not what I meant. I meant alien as in of our universe, but not of this solar system. Not Albion. Not Time Lord, of course, no cross-contamination, but of where I just cannot say.
The group lapsed into silence until the train pulled into Gloriana Station. They left the train and headed towards the station's main entrance. Just before reaching it, they discovered a row of public telecom units, each half enclosed in their own shelter, but open on the side away from the wall to allow access.
Do you have the number for Sir Arthur's unit at the museum?
The doctor asked Professor Halberd.
Londra 625979.
Lou responded crisply. She then reached into a pocket and winced. She had used her right hand out of habit. Carefully she withdrew it.
You won't need the Londra code, but you will need this,
she said as she passed him a small coin. The doctor thanked her, then dialed. From where the others were, all crowded close around his back, they could just make out Sir Arthur's face as it materialized in the centre of the dial. Quickly the doctor apprised him of all that had happened.
It is imperative that we obtain passage to Cairo on the A36. Good. Good. Also, you'll find a sizable blue box on the pavement outside the museum. Yes, that's right. The broken pavement. Ah, I see you've already seen it. Anyway, it is vital that it is shipped with us on the A36. It contains technical equipment of unparalleled value from Xeron, and we will need it. Excellent. We are very much obliged.
The doctor looked less sure of himself.
Now, of these beings we encountered in Northwestwood Cemetery, they absolutely must be rounded up and contained. They potentially pose a very great threat to the residents in those parts. What? No, I wouldn't mention the Xeron delegation while trying to persuade your government to intervene. Yes, I do think a military or at least armed police response might be necessary. I just don't think mentioning the Xerons would be helpful.
Before the doctor could continue his garbled argument, Lou wrenched the handset from him.
Arthur, Lou here. Just tell the authorities that some swarthy foreign agitators are posing as good honest Albions and have taken to thievery, grave robbing and worse, all while hiding in North Westwood Graveyard. Exactly.
And with that, Lou Halberd slammed down the telecom. Nathan, Timmy and Penny gave no signs that Lou had said anything untoward. Some distaste was clearly evident upon the faces of the two Time Lords, however. Lou huffed and stuck her hands upon her hips.
Look, I obviously don't hold with what I just said, but I have no illusions about our empire, good or bad. And unfortunately, an unhealthy dose of jingoism can have a remarkably energizing effect upon our civil servants.
The doctor and Romana still looked far from happy, but accepted the excuse for now. There were trains to Kroidon from Gloriana Station, and so they all agreed to meet back there in an hour and a half. For their part, the Time Lords settled down on a two-seater bench near the platform entrances to wait. There was nowhere else for them to go, their TARDIS presumably already in transit as cargo. While they waited, the doctor opened his satchel and withdrew one of the photographs Nathan had taken earlier, as well as a simple black Sharpie. He pondered something for a moment before making a decision and drawing a rough oval around a section of the picture.
I think I'm beginning to make some sense of all this,
he declared cautiously. Romana leaned a little closer to get a better view of his work. The picture was one of the inside of the sarcophagus, specifically the head end, with the oddly burnt-looking pictograms. The doctor had circled one section of burnt images in the uppermost rows.
What have you got there?
Romana asked curiously.
Well, those pictograms I've highlighted were the ones from Dunbar House which had not been burnt, unlike the same section of the Albion Imperial Museum one.
Fascinating.
Romana offered, her enthusiasm waning somewhat.
Thinking of going into the restoration business?
The doctor frowned at her.
I'm thinking of reading them,
he said bluntly. Romana raised her eyebrows.
Can you?
She asked.
Well, let's see,
he replied.
First, the set from both the museum and Dunbar House. The surrounding text seems to be a devotion to some local god, Setesh, I think, if I've guessed the phonemes correctly. The burnt characters. The first two symbols seem to signify door. The next appears to be a simple joining sign, presumably 2. The last group seem to suggest stars, probably meaning the stars.
Romana nodded.
So a portal then.
The doctor signalled his agreement.
Activated somehow through manipulation of the symbols, hence the burning.
Romana frowned.
You think these portals utilize the bulk somehow?
I suspect if we scan a sarcophagus we'll find it riddled with nth material. Yes, the hands or tentacles of bulk entities at play.
The doctor agreed.
And the extra symbols? The one solely in the museum coffin?
The doctor studied the picture again. His face suddenly brightened.
Oh, I like the first symbol,
he said cheerfully.
It says time.
His face fell sharply.
Ah, I must say I'm not such a fan of the second one. I believe it means kills.
Romana's head bobbed knowingly.
Some form of trap or safeguard, perhaps exactly intended to prevent pursuit of the thief. I guess he was expendable.
So it would seem.
The doctor concurred.
I suppose this could form quite a useful mode of transportation if rendered safe.
Romana mused. The doctor raised a sceptical eyebrow.
If they could be rendered safe, and that's assuming we could get them working at all, and understood how they're connected to one another, or indeed knew how many there were. Let's just say I'd rather not have to find out.
The two Time Lords lapsed into contemplative silence. Their train out of Gloriana Station once more afforded stunning views of the Atlan Ocean, replete with sweeping viaducts, the one they were on this time slightly to the east of the last one they had taken, and marginally longer. They pulled into Purleyway Station, the nearest serving the spaceport, on the slightly less urban, more countryside landmass of Kroidon. A short ride in some cabbies brought them from the station and into the sweeping vehicle entrance of Kroidon Aerodrome itself. The cabbie drop-off point was directly in front of the large glass revolving doors of the main terminal building, a modern construction of neoclassical design, but with many influences harking back to ancient Kroidon monumental architecture. If it had been on Earth, one might have said it had Art Deco touches. Once inside, the museum party looked around the cavernous entrance hall until they spotted a side corridor leading to a cafe. They knew from the departure boards that they had a couple of hours to kill, and so found 2 neighbouring tables in the cafe, ordered drinks and settled down to wait. Something had clearly been bothering Romana.
Your society, indeed most of your societies across the Upsilon Orionis system, appear to be based upon information gleaned from the Encyclopedia Britannica. This I understand. What I don't understand is why have you modeled yourself so closely on the earlier half of the 20th century? The encyclopedia you discovered was from Earth's 25th century. Why on earth, if you'll pardon the pun, didn't you seek to emulate their most advanced society?
She asked. Once again, Lou reluctantly donned the mantle of defender of her people.
Oh, I quite get your point. And you're far from the only person to express such a view in recent history, even amongst Albions ourselves. It is in part an accident of development, but equally it has been a conscious decision, at least on the part of certain groups in power.
As Lou's explanation unfolded, Nathan's attention had drifted. He had heard enough theories on Albion history over the years and was in no mood for a repeat performance. Instead, he began to scan the other customers and employees in the cafe. One woman seated near the entrance caught his attention, as he had surely caught hers. She was staring back at him, smiling faintly.
In part, it is the accident of our technological level. Yes, we have some technologies in advance of early 20th century Earth. Our telecoms, for example. And there is our serendipitous and ancient discovery of space travel. While still primitive by later earthly standards, it undoubtedly skews the picture. Nevertheless, much of our tech coincides with the early modern era in Earth's history.
Lou informed them. The woman at the table got up, her eyes never leaving Nathan's for a moment. She wore a light, floaty, above-the-knee white dress, a rather fetching black choker around her neck. With a waggle of her eyebrows, she turned to leave. Then she paused, turned to look back over her shoulder, and waggled her eyebrows once more.
Hey, excuse me,
Nathan said hesitantly as he rose from his seat.
I've just got to use the restroom.
The others barely glanced up from their conversation, and so Nathan followed the mysterious woman out of the cafe.
Anyway,
Professor Halberg continued after a slight frown.
that is only half of the story. Over a century and a half ago, our government decided to model our society not solely on that of Great Britain. Historically, already the basis of our core language, and specifically in this planet's case, the model of every aspect of its names and culture. Instead, they exclusively based it on the era of the Victorian Empire. They reasoned that this was the pinnacle of Earth's intellectual and artistic expression, and so, as far as physically possible, aimed to fix our culture in that mold, never to be broken asunder. This position was further solidified with the aid of a sympathetic monarch, Gloriana Regina, who came to power shortly after the decision had been made. She utterly embraced the policy, then did them a great service by living an exceptionally long life. Our Victoria has been on the throne for 100 years and shows no sign of quitting any time soon.
Here Lou paused and shook her head wearily.
It has only been the inevitable march of technology which has rather forced their hand in the last 2 or 3 decades, allowing society to adopt a few more trappings of Earth's interwar period. Oh well, baby steps.
Lou's final words were delivered with a theatrically wistful sigh. The doctor and Romana smiled appreciatively.
Well, that's one mystery solved at any rate.
The doctor declared, clapping his hands and rising to his feet.
Now on to more mundane matters. Romana and I must excuse ourselves for a moment. We need to discover if our equipment has been delivered safely or not.
Their Albion companions nodded their assent, and so the Doctor and Romana left the cafe. Nathan followed the strangely beautiful woman into the aerodrome's main concourse, keeping a discreet distance. Not so discreet as to be unnoticed by his quarry, as she frequently glanced back over her shoulder, still wearing her secret smile. She entered another corridor on the opposite side of the main hall, one which seemed devoted to administrative offices and the like. As such, it was devoid of passengers and currently deserted, save for the mysterious lady and, shortly thereafter, Nathan Ivan. The corridor turned a right angle ahead, and the woman glided around the corner and disappeared. Nathan noticed there was a large locked gate in the wall ahead, which seemed to be the entry to the luggage warehouse. His attention thereby partially distracted, he turned the corner and ran straight into the woman in white. She chuckled slightly as she placed her hands on his upper arms to steady them both.
Well, hello there.
She cooed soothingly.
My name is Marina de la Mer. I sensed you wanted to meet me, and now you have me at a disadvantage.
Nathan was a little flustered, both by their sudden collision and by the introduction.
Yes. I'm Nathan Ivan, PI, working on behalf of the Albion Imperial Museum.
Marina studied him for a moment, her own expression inscrutable.
Ah, yes. You'll be in pursuit of Dr. Nugati, no doubt.
She concluded to herself. Nathan's mouth fell open.
You know him?
He gasped.
Are you with him?
Nathan then asked with trepidation. Marina de la Mer once more smiled her little smile.
Oh, the good doctor and I have had our run-ins from time to time. But I think it's fair to say I'm no more with him than against him.
She confided cryptically. Then she nodded to a frosted glass door in the wall next to them.
However, I think we'd be much more comfortable carrying on our discussion in private. I don't imagine either of us want to be disturbed.
Nathan felt nagging alarm bells going off inside his head. Unfortunately, they were drowned out by other signals from elsewhere. He felt oddly compelled to follow her into the disused office. And so he did. The Doctor and Romana crossed the same concourse area so recently traversed by Nathan and the mysterious Marina. They even entered the same deserted corridor, though their quarry was different and already in sight. As they approached the corner of the corridor, they thought they heard the sound of a door closing around that bend, but as they arrived at the luggage warehouse gate, they saw nothing in the corridor to their right. The Doctor knocked upon the gate. They were greeted with silence.
Oh dear,
he said, frowning.
I was rather hoping I could use the psychic paper again.
While Romana was still highly displeased with the Doctor's recent behaviour, the very thing which had landed them in this mess in the first place, she could not entirely suppress a smile at his habits and mannerisms.
Well, you do have another of your favorite devices on you. Even if it is from one of your former selves,
she said teasingly. The Doctor harumphed, but withdrew the sonic screwdriver. With a quick burst, the door's lock sprang open. Taking care to be as quiet as possible, they opened the gate and entered the warehouse. The room beyond was huge and contained row upon row of shelves and enclosures containing goods of a wide variety of sizes and shapes. And about 20 metres ahead they saw the TARDIS. Whatever relief they felt upon seeing it safe and sound and ready for loading was utterly overshadowed by the shock of what they saw standing 5 metres to the left of it. He was studying some crates and looked human, though both the Time Lords knew he was not. Romana gasped involuntarily, while the Doctor's face darkened considerably. Although the individual was partially turned away from them, his clothes, hair and form were instantly recognisable. He turned towards them and broke into a broad grin.
Doogie Rev.
The office, which had been commandeered by Marina de la Mer, appeared to belong to a Morton Air Services, judging by the various advertising paraphernalia scattered around the room. Nathan guessed they had gone out of business a couple of weeks ago, if the unflipped calendar on the wall was any indication. Marina tugged him towards the empty desk, which dominated the middle of the room. She sat upon it, one knee drawn up provocatively in front of her, that foot on the desk itself. Her other foot remained firmly planted on the floor.
I can tell you desire me,
she said in sultry tones, never once letting go of Nathan's arm. A look of uncertainty passed across his face, and it seemed for a moment he might pull away.
I only seek to help you.
Marina continued reassuringly.
In oh, so many ways.
Nathan felt his will to resist melting away. He moved one knee up onto the desk, his leg touching hers. All the while, he kept his other foot planted firmly on the floor. He grabbed her shoulders, pulling her close, and thrust his lips against hers. They kissed for many long moments, before finally breaking for air.
I've never felt like that before,
Nathan gasped, before shaking his head and recovering some small semblance of self-control.
You say you want to help me. How?
Marina Della Mare gently pulled his head closer and kissed him once again. When next they broke, she gave her other answer.
That scarab you are pursuing, the one now in the hands of Dr. Nugati, it is a key. One which will release a long-trapped demon, who will devour the world unless we stop it.
Nathan looked utterly incredulous and even pulled away from the woman a little.
Don't be ridiculous. I won't say there's at least one person in our party who'd lap up all this demon business, but I'm more a man of the physical.
Oh, I can tell.
Marina interrupted with a wink.
And there's no way you could know what we're after unless you're working with Nugati, and all this demon stuff is just bull.
Marina frowned and thought for a moment.
Let's just say that where Dr. Nugati is concerned, I have my sources. As to the whole demon business, well, let's try another tack. You are aware, are you not, of the work of Albert Einstein? Funny, ardently a fellow.
This latest statement did nothing to dispel Nathan's increasingly fixed look of incredulity.
Yes, I'm aware of him. He was a human who died over 200,000 years ago, a quarter of a galaxy away. And yet you make it sound like you knew him well. Very well indeed.
Marina looked a little coy. In spite of himself, Nathan stroked her face.
Oh, very well. For a while. You see, my people are not quite like yours. Or humans, for that matter. We may be born of 4 dimensions, just as you, or dear funny little Albert were, but our origins are from a somewhat higher plane. We're not so fixed in time and space as you, Albions, are.
Nathan looked truly aghast by this point. It was not so much her words as what he had uncovered as he removed his hand from her face. On his fingertips he could feel a greasy substance, identical in colour to his own skin. His fingers had left lines wiped free upon Marina's face. These tracks were not white as with any Albion, but were instead a strangely greenish grey. Romana stared at Rongad, eyes wide.
Rongad!
She gasped.
I thought you surely dead.
Rongad waggled his head, still grinning.
And I thought you surely gone for good. It's certainly been long enough.
He responded cheerfully. Romana shook her head, confused. The doctor merely continued to frown, studying the Argond archaeologist intently.
Been long enough?
Romana finally said.
But it's only been a matter of weeks for us. A couple of months at the most.
For you, maybe,
Rongad said significantly.
But I haven't seen hide nor hair of you for over 1,000 years. I mean, true, a blink of an eye for the likes of you or I, no doubt, but more than a couple of months.
Romana shook her head, still unable to fully accept the sight before her. Rongad was dressed exactly as when they had last met, crumpled white shirt, tan trousers, satchel over one shoulder, shades perched on his forehead. He had even acquired a replacement sword stick, identical to the one in Romana's hand. She looked down at it, then back to Rongad.
I kept this safe for you,
she said in hushed tones, offering the weapon towards the Argond. Rongad chuckled.
Nah, keep it,
he said breezily.
As you can see, I've another one now. Granted, the blade is a little less extraordinary than the one you have, but it does the job.
Romana slowly replaced the tip of her sword cane upon the ground, then finally shook herself free of her state of shock.
We saw you die,
she said firmly.
How are you here?
Here Rongad looked a little sheepish.
Well, we Argons have a certain ability, evolved for stressful situations. It's primitive, instinctive, and seldom used. We can die for short periods if necessary. And have you used this often?
This question came from the doctor.
Well, no, it's not something we treat lightly, and usually we like a bit more warning and preparation. The only other time I did it was for a year for tax reasons, and it was done with lots of planning and care. This time was spur of the moment and a lot more chancy. You wouldn't believe how relieved I was when I came back to life a few hours later. All the survivors had wandered off, of course. No life, no attraction. I managed to get the survival pod comms active again, and the merchant ship which dropped me off on end of the line kindly picked me up. All's well that ends well.
Romana stared accusingly at the doctor.
Did you know about this?
The doctor stroked his chin and looked thoughtfully up at the ceiling.
Well, at the time I had certainly forgotten. However, as Rongad described the process just now, it did ring a few faint bells.
Rongad looked at Romana's fuming features and chuckled.
If I were you, I'd have just lied and said no,
he advised the doctor with a wink.
I'm not in the habit of lying,
the doctor said airily.
Not for a very long time. Oh, really?
Rongad responded with a raised eyebrow.
How come you're here on Albia?
The doctor continued, either ignoring or oblivious to the Algon's scepticism.
And how do you explain your human appearance to the locals? Are you pretending to be from Earth? The short answer to your first question is archaeology. I'll come back to that one. As to the second, I told them I'm Argond. Simple as that. They don't know this is not my native form.
As he said this, he allowed his eyes to shift briefly to more orange reptilian ones before settling back to human.
What about you guys?
He then asked.
Do they know you're Time Lords? We are part of the Xeron diplomatic delegation,
the doctor said haughtily.
So, no lying then?
Rongad responded with a wry smile. The doctor ignored him and had moved next to the crate Rongad had been examining earlier. He lifted up the name tag, tied by a loop of string.
It seems we have a mutual interest in Dr. Nugatti,
the doctor said sternly.
Do you know him well?
Rongad's face fell. All good humour vanished instantly. Nathan still could not tear himself free from Marina's grip. Not that she possessed any inhuman or inalbian strength. His mind was torn between horror at the most recent revelations or discoveries and an insane desire. He began to kiss her face, working down towards her neck. This gave her further opportunity to speak.
If you know of Einstein, you're no doubt also aware that, as far as you are concerned, the universe is made up of 4 dimensions. 3 spatial and 1 temporal.
Nathan grunted. He had just made it to where her jawline met her neck. Both each had 1 foot firmly fixed to the floor.
While this vision is at once grand when seen against the sum total of all human or Albion knowledge, it is pitiful when viewed from within the 11-dimensional whole.
Nathan's mind reeled, not so much because of the multidimensional mechanics, more because he had nudged her choker down while kissing her neck and revealed odd-looking lines. They seemed almost like gills.
There are entities which exist within the whole, the bulk, who would view our tiny bubble of existence as a sketch on rice paper, an amusing morsel. For them, time truly shares equal weighting with the other 10 dimensions, and to us, their existence would seem fractured and disjointed. They are at once being born, existing, and dying, and yet have never existed from our perspective. To them, any direction within the book can form their memory, their history.
Now Nathan's mind truly was reeling from her words. He feared it might fracture and fly asunder at any moment. He moved his hand in what might have started as a defensive action, but ended as a caress of her hair. This did nothing to protect his sanity, however, as the hair fell off. It had been a wig. Underneath there was no central ridge from which Albion fronds would grow. Instead, her scalp was almost completely round, nearly smooth but with a slight texture, something like shark skin. And it was all a greenish grey. Marina's tale was by no means finished.
To us, These intelligences seem multifaceted, even multi-entity, although it is possible all Albion, or earthly, perception of them could be reduced to one being, if only we had a higher vantage point. Names have attached themselves to these glimpses. Icthultu, No God, Breshapep, Enar the Fetid, to name but a few. Both the ancient humans and Chiroans associated Setsesh with Icthultu. Perhaps they knew more than their modern counterparts would give them credit for.
Nathan's head was spinning drunkenly upon his neck. Still he found the presence of mind to ask a question.
What are you?
He cried, fighting the urge to vomit.
And how is Dr. Nugatti involved in all this? And these things, Icthultu and the like, what concern are they if they're not even aware of us?
As he said this, his hand dropped from the top of her head, past her petite Albion nose. It was knocked free to lie upon the desk. In its place were two longish slits of nostrils, utterly flush with her remarkably flat face. In spite of the overwhelming revulsion he felt upon seeing this, he grabbed her close and kissed her even more passionately. As ever, they each kept one shoe in contact with the carpet. Keeping her mouth free as best she could, Marina answered him.
My people have many names, most beyond your capacity to pronounce. Perhaps the easiest for you to use would be the one used throughout history on Earth. The devils of the sea we were called. Not to be confused with the sea devils, of course. Those Johnny-come-latelys were no doubt trading off the fame of our name. We, the devils of the sea, are bound to Icthultu and Nogad, our creator, and must always do their bidding. Dr. Nugatti seeks to allow Icthultu, or Satesh if you prefer, access to our modern world, to raise him from his stupor by opening a portal to the bulk and calling him. Nugatti seeks shadowy forbidden knowledge, a new dark world order perhaps. Satesh cares little for his wishes and will simply consume the life energy of this system, and probably the entire universe.
Nathan groaned as he strained under the weight of all this arcane lore, a knowledge he was never born to know.
Why are you helping me? Helping us?
Nathan gasped drunkenly, not even sure if his question was based in truth. Marina shook her bald, noseless head sadly.
Nothing we can do will stop Satesh Icthultu Nogad. We can only hope to prevent his gaze focusing too sharply upon the waking world, to forestall our meeting for another day. When? Only the stars can say. My kind were born when Nogad last touched this universe, in various splinters of time and space. We are in part of them, and yet live for our own pleasures. I must serve them if they see me, but I have my own mind while unobserved. I have not yet tired of the pleasures afforded by these dark and complex worlds, of Albions and humans. I have no desire to join my higher dimensional masters. So, as long as I am able, I will aid you.
Rongad looked grim as he spoke. I came here for archaeology, history, sociology. You know, fun. That was about 20 years ago. Then, just after the last great war in this system, I met Nugatti through our common interest in ancient artifacts. It was only later that I understood his real interests. Far too late, in fact, he said, shaking his head sorrowfully.
What is it, Rongard? What did he do?
Romana asked with concern. Rongad sighed and steeled himself to continue. Dr. Nugatti is obsessed with immortality. I learnt too late that he had some sort of links to or aid from the bulk. Yes, I'm aware of the fragile nature of this solar system. He had been doing some horrific experiments to restore, or more accurately, revive life in Albions and other indigenous life forms of the system, to horrible effect. And none of this would have been possible without me. The doctor had never ceased his frowning, and his concerns now found voice.
How did you aid his research?
Rongad shook his head remorsefully.
He got me drunk one night and stole some of my blood. Quite a bit to judge from how I felt the next day. I suspect he only left me alive in case he needed more later. I have to stop him and put an end to his perversion of life and nature.
The doctor showed a rare flash of compassion towards the Argand.
You were careless, that cannot be denied. But you are not responsible for Nugati's perfidy and crimes.
Rongad looked at the doctor and nodded his thanks.
So it seems we have some common interests after all,
the doctor continued briskly.
I suggest we all make our way to departures. No doubt you already have a ticket, Rongad. We don't want to miss our flight.
Rongad withdrew his passport and ticket and waved them casually at the Time Lords. Together they all left the warehouse, entering the corridor beyond. They were surprised to see Nathan Ivon stumbling out of a nearby office, looking positively shell-shocked.
Did you find the toilet?
The doctor asked with concern, tinged by a little suspicion. Nathan's eyes seemed a million miles away, and when he spoke, he was unusually distant and subdued.
I think I'm done. Yes,
he said brokenly. Together, the four companions left to find Lou, Timmy and Penny, and from there head to departures.